give in. I'm not wearing a fucking mask. I'm not scared around you. You can't use that on me. Happy and free. Powerful positivity. Say what you believe in. Try fighting uphill with me. Avoid the dangers of conformity. A lighter with no action. Destroy this corporate thing. A lighter with no action. Destroy this corporate thing. Brave your ancestors for the power you need. We're not gonna give in. I'm not wearing a mask. We're not scared around you. You can't use that on me. Happy and free. Powerful positivity. Say what you believe in. Try fighting uphill with me. Avoid the dangers of conformity. A lot of us with no action.
how's it going? Good evening, everyone. Sorry, sometimes I'm quicker than other times with that button hit. I had to put the dog in the other room because she is learning that barking means she gets attention, and Andy and I are really trying not to teach her that, but that certainly seems to be the message that she is taking away from this. So frustrating, but oh well, we'll get there. No worries. All part of training. It is freezing today. It's something like 27 degrees outside, and it snowed last night and throughout the day today as well. So I am just basically shaking in my boots over here because I am so cold. So hopefully I'm able to make it through this show without teeth chattering. It's crazy. And I don't know what it is about this room, but when I close the door, it gets super, super cold, especially when it is for as long as an hour. So I just need Dot to be quiet so I can make some of this stuff happen. But I wanted to open today's show by asking you guys if you would ever take a shot for cancer to prevent you from getting it. This is the world's first cancer vaccine, one step closer to reality. Moderna, oh, there's a red flag for me. Moderna's melanoma shot is given breakthrough drug status by the FDA, meaning it could be approved in months. The shot plus Keytruda reduced the risk of skin cancer's recurrence or death 44%. Breakthrough status was granted to the therapy by the FDA yesterday. Moderna gets more contact with the FDA and is eligible for priority review. I wonder why that is. No, really, I don't know. A cancer vaccine made by Moderna has been given breakthrough therapy status by health chiefs, paving the way for fast-tracked approval. The shot, given alongside an immunotherapy drug that's called Keytruda, is used to help treat patients recovering from advanced melanoma who are at risk for tumors returning. So basically the groundwork would be that this is only used for people who A, have cancer, so this isn't like a preventive measure, and B, who have had tumors, because this is actually really kind of neat the way it works. How will the new jab work? Tumors surgically removed, so this is a surgery, first step. 2, they identify the tumor's genetic mutations probably by sequencing the DNA. 3, insert tumor cells into mRNA, which acts as the delivery vessel. 4, the mRNA delivers genetic instructions to human cells, teaching them to spot cancer cells. And 5, if the cancer returns, the white blood cells are ready to fight it. Now, whatever you think of this particular medicine in this particular instance, this actually is really kind of interesting use of mRNA therapy. And I know that mRNA therapy has gotten a really bad rap because of COVID, but it's actually super interesting technology, and they're learning more and more about how to use it positively for people. So I guess we'll see what happens with this. It's kind of like, do you guys remember when they took some of the barriers off? They called it right to try. And it was basically for people who are in like the last stages of a really bad illness. And they said, you can now try all of these medicines that we would never test on normally healthy people. And I thought that was a really neat thing, because that gave people who were really, really close to death the opportunity to like have a second shot and maybe consider a different drug would make a good difference in their instance. Now, I don't know if anything actually came of that, but I thought that was a really neat thing. I feel like if you're coming up on the end of your life because of some illness or another, you should have every chance to try everything you want to try to see if it will stop the progression of the illness. That's just my 2 cents. You guys are welcome to disagree with me. Oh, we got a retweet, Andy. So let me come up here. We are not, I think we are on many podcast platforms. I was able to find the Sour Patch, which is what my Substack is called, over on Google Podcasts, which is where I listen to podcasts. All right, Andy says, is the CCP turning a new humanitarian leaf? China begins ethnically vaccinating its Uyghur Muslim population against COVID? 3 question marks, mind-blowing emoji. Doubt. All right, so we are going to be talking about, not about that, we're going to be talking about totally different things, but thank you, Andy, for setting that up for us. Keenan says, no notifications for me yet. I'm very sorry about that. I would double check the notifications are on and refresh everything. I believe we're on Apple Podcasts. Look for the Sour Patch over there and let us know what you find, because I'm not sure. Andy and I don't have Apple products that we listen to podcasts with. You may as well be Keenan. Oh, yes. Bree made the horrible choice of going to McDonald's. Terrible decision, really. Let's see here. Not from Moderna. Yes, says Stuart for sure. Bree says, I read that as Madonna. Haha, not Moderna. Yes, similar effect. Madonna versus Moderna. All right, I have to download something for work real fast here. So let me get that party started. I wanted to talk about this. This is the headline for today's conversation. Biden will not take trip to Ohio train derailment site after Trump visit, according to the White House. And here we have Karine Jean-Pierre. President Biden still has no plans to visit residents of East Palestine, Ohio, after a toxic chemical spill there caused by a train derailment. Excuse me, I cannot read. Actually, it's the New York Post. Look what their site keeps doing to me. That's really kind of annoying, guys. Get it together. 3 weeks ago, White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre told reporters on Thursday, one day after former President Donald Trump traveled to the state. In response to repeated questions, Jean-Pierre reiterated that Biden, 80, has made no travel arrangements but is, quote, getting briefed pretty regularly, close quote, and taking the situation, quote, very seriously. He offered federal assistance and directed his team to stay on top of this, the press secretary said. Oh my gosh, this is ridiculous. At the time, I don't have anything to read out or announce on travel to Ohio. Biden was criticized by Republicans and East Palestine's mayor earlier this week for traveling to Ukraine to mark the anniversary of Russia's invasion of the country, rather than visiting the site of the domestic disaster. Excuse me, I have the hiccups. Trump, 76, went to East Palestine on Wednesday to meet with residents affected by the February 3rd derailment, handing out thousands of bottles of Trump water and saying the community has been betrayed by the Biden administration. So is everybody willing to accept free food from Trump? Asked the former president while at the McDonald's in East Palestine, Ohio. Buys police and firefighters food after making remarks about the train derailment. You are not forgotten, he told a crowd assembled at the local firehouse. You're going to have plenty of water for a long time. The former president later treated first responders in the village near the Pennsylvania line to free meals at McDonald's. Jean-Pierre also claimed during the briefing that a Thursday visit to East Palestine by Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg was not done at the behest of the president. Buttigieg admitted to reporters on the ground that he had waited too long before personally addressing the derailment. The 41-year-old also said that by not traveling to East Palestine right away, he was trying to strike a balance between his, quote, desire to be involved and following the, quote, norm of transportation secretaries. I'll do some thinking about whether I got that balance right, he said. Goodness gracious. Here we are drinking East Palestine water with EPA Administrator Michael Regan and Ohio Governor Mike DeWine. Interesting. Buttigieg and his press secretary both laid into reporters this week for asking questions about his delayed response to this crisis. I'm going to refer you to the comments I made to the press because right now I'm taking some personal time and I'm walking down the street, Buttigieg told Daily Caller reporter Jenny Terr on Tuesday. I do not want to be on camera, Press Secretary Carrie Arndt told reporters on Thursday before calling one of them aggressive for attempting to film her response. So they're not handling this very well, and it's kind of amusing. I can't lie. I'm very tickled by how poorly this is going for the diversity hires over at the Biden administration. And I just wanted to point this out as well. Recently, Karine Jean-Pierre called President Biden President Obama. Don't start playing automatically. That's uncalled for. Wrong administration, says the New York Post. White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre mistakenly referred to President Biden as President Obama off the top of her Thursday briefing. Jean-Pierre's slip came as she announced that the president had nominated former MasterCard CEO Ajay Banga to lead the World Bank. Fascinating. So today, as you all saw just an hour or so ago, President Obama announced that, President Biden, she quickly corrected herself amid gasps and laughter from the White House press corps. Whoa, that is news, she said. I know. We're going back, not forward. We got to go forward. Ridiculous. I don't think that she's competent at all. And honestly, she looks really miserable in her job. I really wanted to read you guys this Intelligencer article, and I'm going to try not to sneer. I did look through it, and it is very sneer-worthy, trust me. But we are going to look at it because even the New York Magazine is starting to notice that maybe the Biden administration is handling East Palestine wrong. So, We're going to put on our happy faces and go through this. Here we go. Wish me luck. Donald Trump somehow made it to East Palestine, Ohio before Joe Biden or Pete Buttigieg. That's correct. The former president, desperate to return to the White House, accused the Biden administration of indifference and betrayal for its response to a train derailment that leaked toxic chemicals into the air and waterways of the town. It was a tantalizing opportunity for Trump, a way for him to play act, once again, the populist. Okay, so they are demonstrating one of the things that I hate the most about anybody online, but especially the media, and that is assuming they know what someone else is thinking. They're telling us that he's play acting the populist. They're telling us that he's desperate to return to the White House. They don't know any of this for a fact. They are assigning intentions where they have no evidence. Of course, Trump was not genuine. Here we go, even more. He does not care about what the Federal Emergency Management Agency does or does not do. Despite being president for 4 years, he likely barely understands the federal bureaucracy or how disaster relief works in the United States. Remember his callous indifference to Hurricane Maria's victims in Puerto Rico? Having gutted the Environmental Protection Agency, he certainly does not care about the future of the air or water in any country, let alone one that he carried with ease in 2020. And that is correct. And that perhaps is a hint as to why Biden is not interested in helping these people. These people voted overwhelmingly Republican in 2020. These aren't Joe Biden's voters. And I couldn't be less surprised that he's treating them with such disdain. Now, I will say to the intelligencer that the gutting of the EPA does not necessarily correlate to a poorer air quality or water quality. Assuming that a governmental agency is going to make a difference in the quality of life for people is absolutely nuts. Like crazy, bonkers, leftist utopianism. Governmental agency does not equal overall positive, period. All right, but let's continue. We're going to make it through this article one way or another. He does not care about rail safety either. In 2018, the Trump administration rolled back an Obama-era regulation that required railroads carrying crude oil or other dangerous liquids to outfit their trains with more responsive electronic braking systems that might have mitigated, if not prevented, the toxic derailment. Fun fact, this train would not have been included in that in any case. And I found that out while researching. Oh my gosh, let me see if I can find this thing. All right, let's go in here. I'm going to go to my profile. I think that I can search. You know what? I'm just going to search because I pointed out from the article from at Sour Patch Lids. That's how you search what somebody said. Okay, the Washington Post said the Trump administration abandoned rail safety rules that were pursued during the Obama era. The Biden administration is trying to revive some of them. And I said, from the article, had the Obama era rule remained in place, it still would not have applied to the train that derailed in Ohio. These people don't care about the truth. Period. It's kind of obnoxious, but we can continue. The railroad industry, recoiling at any federal regulation that could cost them precious cash, had pumped Trump's campaign with plenty of donations when he first ran for president. In 2019, working at the behest of the railroad companies, the administration also relaxed regulations on shipping fracked national gas through communities like East Palestine. Fracked national gas is not what caused this problem, but thank you, intelligencer. Wrongly named. Like any Republican or neoliberal Democrat, Trump was a standout deregulator. Who can blame him? I don't think that regulation actually causes the ideal goals that the intelligencer has in mind. They might not ever admit it, but I don't think that regulation is the way forward. It is the Biden administration's flailing response through its telegenic transportation secretary that has allowed Trump to reap his political reward anyway. Pete Buttigieg is finally visiting East Palestine after taking more than a week to publicly respond to the derailment in any fashion. Buttigieg, who has already failed to heavily fine and censure the airline industry for a year of disarray, took a distressingly lax approach to the Ohio disaster in the early days. That's correct, and I can't believe the New York Magazine is saying this. Buttigieg told reporters he would visit the town when the time was right, but moved up his visit to Thursday after Trump announced he was headed there. At the minimum, it's embarrassing that it took such opportunism to make Buttigieg understand that he had to travel to the scene of the derailment. It shouldn't take far-right figures who otherwise want to hollow out federal government to become unwitting champions of the environment. That's right. The left has completely ignored East Palestine. They care much, much, much more about Ukraine than they do about their fellow Americans. But once again, we know that this county voted overwhelmingly for Trump. So as far as I'm concerned, the left doesn't think that these people are humans. They just see them as ideological enemies, as ontologically evil, and people who are not worthy of being saved. It is overly simplistic to fully blame Buttigieg for a disaster that was first and foremost a catastrophic failure for Norfolk Southern, the rail company. Buttigieg this week announced a package of reforms that would, if implemented, bolster rail safety, but far too much of the response from communication to cleanup has been outsourced to a private company that has unnerved locals. The company's decision to undertake a controlled burn to release the hazardous chemicals into the air has led to fears that it could harm residents' health both in the near and long term. The EPA maintains that air and water tests show no hazard to residents, but government officials can get things wrong and they can lie. That's right. Thank you for observing this, intelligencer. They maintained that the water was safe to drink in Flint until it was not, and that there was no risk from the debris right after 9/11 before thousands came down with cancer. The residents of East Palestine are entitled to their paranoia. Correction, that is not paranoia. Paranoia is unfounded. This, that the people in East Palestine are experiencing, is fully founded on facts, provable facts from Flint and from New York City. No one truly knows what's to come. There might be an instinct among liberals furious that Trump and Tucker Carlson and other hard-right figures are championing East Palestine to downplay the derailment altogether. The old Fox News fallacy comes into play. If the Republicans really care about it, how does it actually matter? The answer, of course, is quite a lot, because health problems from environmental crises tend to develop on a longer time scale. If Republicans care about the future of East Palestine and other towns like it, they could embrace the cause of federal regulation. No, absolutely not necessary. They should loosen regulations and impose and allow the free market to step in and show that companies that allow this kind of thing to happen should get no business whatsoever down the road. I think that's the only way to do it. Now, railways are a little bit different because there's only about 4, I think, in the US, 2 on each coast, something like that. There's very few. They're incredibly expensive to get into. Warren Buffett didn't even start his own because it was just too expensive. But I digress. They could embrace the cause of federal regulation, partnering with Democrats and perhaps Buttigieg to beat back lobbying efforts and ensure trains have proper safety measures. Buttigieg should be far more assertive, wielding his own executive power to pressure a recalcitrant and profit-driven railroad industry into caring about the safety of other Americans. Well, Democrats should be caring about the safety of other Americans too, don't you think? Oh, that's right. These people didn't vote for their guy. The EPA will now take control of the cleanup and force Norfolk Southern to pay. It's a nice if belated start. Biden will need to prove to East Palestine he cares far more about corporate accountability than Trump ever did. I found that to be kind of interesting because it actually ended up being pretty insightful. Now, obviously, I disagree with them on pretty much everything, but at this, they did have some really good points, and I do think that there was certainly a case to be made there. I felt like they weren't unreasonable with what they were saying by any means. But I also don't think, obviously, they didn't have the correct assertions. Like, their understanding was that regulations would save us all, which I think is complete nonsense. Yes, the puppy is very loud, Andy says, and I completely agree. It's not good at all, but it is what it is. We'll just have to train her to be quieter. She does have a particularly ear-splitting bark, unfortunately, and she will continue to have one until we figure out how to teach her not to do that while we're trying to record. Very important for both of us. Dad has meetings, Mom has recording, but oh well, we'll figure it out. You guys will just have to listen to her bark just like we do. I don't love this new phase where she's just pretty much like barking nonstop. It's absolutely bonkers. It's really frustrating, but We will get through it. We'll teach her not to do it. It'll be okay. We'll come out stronger for it, etc. We need to go through and figure out good ways to disincentivize her from barking. Let me see what you guys are thinking here. Comparing environmental disaster apples to apples, Biden is worse than Carter, says Steve. Mr. JP says, no audio. Is it just me? It may be just you because everybody else seems able to hear me. I'm sorry about that though. Maybe try and check and make sure that nothing is muted on your end. Bree says, I have a toddler who comes in when I try to record, so I had to edit mine a bit today. Yeah, for sure. It's very fun. I'm very nervous right now that Dot's going to make it over here, but we'll see what happens. Hopefully Dad's able to stave her off and she can bark from a distance over there. All right, you guys, we're next going to look at some more of Biden's delightful employees, or I should say previous employees. Sam Brinton's style inspiration, Tanzanian fashion designer who lost her luggage in 2018, claims Biden's fired non-binary nuclear waste guru, Sam Brinton, has been wearing her custom-made outfits. Former Department of Energy official Sam Brinton was fired last year. Brinton has been accused of stealing luggage from multiple airports. Yes, he was seen on camera doing just that. He actually came up against federal charges for that, if I recall correctly. Fashion designer Asia Kamsin, who reported her luggage missing in 2018, alleges that Brinton has been wearing the clothing from her missing suitcase. Holy cow, who are they going to side with this time? The non-binary former Biden official or this Tanzanian, literally an immigrant fashion designer who made her own clothes, which he ended up stealing? This one is one for the books. Here he is wearing it. This is crazy. Oh my gosh, I can't believe we live in this timeline. I am endlessly amused by it. When I'm not crying, I am certainly laughing. It's wild. It is insane. She says, even this jewelry was in my lost bag. Holy cow. That's insane. Brinton attended the Trevor Project, Trevor Live NYC, on June 11, 2018, in an outfit that Kamsin said resembled her outfits that went missing with her luggage in March 2018. So the timeline matches up and everything. So you can see here what he's wearing. What a weirdo. And then here's what she designed. Yes, very similar. Not sure if that was the exact same piece. She filed a police report with the Metropolitan Washington Airports Authority Police Department, as well as a complaint with Delta Airlines, while she pleaded with the airlines to help locate her lost bag of expensive clothing and jewelry. When Brinton's photos appeared on the news, Kamsin became convinced they were wearing her outfits. Oh, they still refer to Sam by they pronouns. I forgot about that. Incredibly confusing. Convinced Sam was wearing her outfits that had gone missing from the airport. Kamsin sent files and a complaint to the Houston Police Department on December 16th and spoke with the FBI on the investigation. But as of this week, Brinton has not been charged with a crime connected to her claims. Last week, he walked out of a Minnesota court after a preliminary hearing on luggage theft charges in a separate incident. Sam could face up to 5 years in prison and/or a $10,000 fine if found guilty. According to the complaint, Brinton removed a tag from a woman's luggage and walked out with the bag at Minneapolis-St. Paul Airport on September 16th. The items inside were appraised at $2,325. And it's not just the actual value of the items, it's the fact that she designed them. I would be so offended. I would be I would be incensed if I had designed an item of clothing and then somebody like Sam effing Brinton had stolen them and worn them, and everyone had been like, oh my gosh, Sam's so brave and so amazing. Sam is so non-binary. And that would just infuriate me. I would not be able to keep my mouth shut. Holy cow, this lady has a lot more self-control than I would in her situation. Like, imagine, it's not just the intrinsic value of the clothes, it's the fact that it's her own creative expression. And it's ostensibly what she uses to pay her own bills as an artist. That's hard to qualify. It's a very, very high price that you can put on that for sure. This is just so gross and nasty. And Every time I see something come out of the Biden administration like this, I'm just like, you know what? This is what happens when you make diversity hires. Like, there is no other excuse for it. It's just gross. It's just disturbing. And it makes me feel like no one is in charge, unfortunately. LOL, every time I see this story, says Sarenko, I can't help but laugh at the absolute absurdity of it all. Yeah, me too. Stevie says, Biden is the Ukrainian president, not the American president. Yeah, he's certainly given them more money than he's given American citizens. Probably wearing, yeah. Stevie, Google's YouTube autocorrects a lot of things that I say. I'm sorry, Keenan, you're being censored by Big Google. Paul, thank you so much for your super chat. He says swag for Dip, so we'll have to get Dip a little jacket to wear outside. It is plenty cold, so I'm sure he would love that. Good. Okay, Psycho Clown says we can't hear her. Well, I certainly can. She's keeping me awake. I'll give her that. Unfortunately, she's not calming down, but hopefully she will over time. All right. Yes, the article about how it wouldn't have even helped. I talked about that on my stream the other day. They definitely wanted people to readjust the headline, says Bree. Yeah, for sure. Stevie says, I love Jimmy Carter. I love how Jimmy Carter is known as the worst modern American president, and Jimmy Carter got involved during the 3 Mile Island disaster. Interesting. I forgot that was under him. That's crazy. I don't know what exactly Biden thinks he's doing, but it feels very much to me like he's trying just to punish people who didn't vote for him, which is literally directly in line with everything I know about him as the most divisive president that I have yet seen in my lifetime. I mean, literally more divisive than Barack Obama. And he said a lot of terrible racist things and sowed a lot of division in that regard. But I think that I don't even know what to make of this. Like, how do you go on from somebody who's just like outrageously divisive and then something like this happens and then they're like, oh no, he has no plans to go there. And no, FEMA isn't going to give funds to these poor people because their whole houses weren't destroyed in this horrific accident. And it's just like, I'm sorry, what? That doesn't seem right. That doesn't fit what I understand the role of FEMA to be. But I guess I could be wrong about them. I guess technically that could be correct. But to me, that just sounds like such an excuse. It's absolutely gross. And I don't like it. I really hate this division that we're seeing. And I can't wait for it to be over. It had better be done in 2024. I don't know if I can make it much longer. Perfectly said, no one is in charge, says CVL Jr. Grandpa asleep at the wheel, indeed. Yeah, I really don't think that he's the person putting through these crazy executive orders for diversity, equity, and inclusion. I really don't think that's his doing because not that long ago, he was arguing against same-sex marriage. Like, that seems like such a leap for somebody to go from actually voting against bills that okayed gay marriage to just pushing diversity, equity, and inclusion at every single level. That just seems like such a leap to me, but I don't know. I could be wrong. I hope I'm wrong. I actually would feel better if somebody were in charge instead of just this crazy nothingness. It feels like we're in a runaway car at this point, which is distressing. Stuart, thank you so much for your super chat. NATO is the aggressor using the cult to hide their agenda. Yeah, so the cult is actually a form of American imperialism because I don't know if you recall, but the U.S. used to fly the pride flag alongside of the U.S. flag with a lot of this stuff in a lot of their embassies. And I was just like, that's not the American flag. That's the pride flag. Not everyone in the U.S. is gay or even approves of this kind of agenda. It's nothing in line with actual American values, and they couldn't even bring themselves to fly flags that everyone in the U.S. agrees on. Like, at least we all agree that the American flag is the flag of the U.S., but not the pride flag, not at all. Now, yesterday, we looked at this lady who seemed a little unhinged as she was talking about the grand jury goings-on in Fulton County, Georgia. Her name was Emily Coors. Now, we have a statement from the Fulton County grand jury. So let's look at this from Catherine Harridge, who is a wonderful reporter with CBS, believe it or not. Statement from attorneys Jennifer Little, Drew Feindling, and Marissa Goldberg, who represent former President Trump in Fulton County. The media tour undertaken by the foreperson of the grand jury may have been surprising to some because of its unprecedented nature, but in reality was emblematic of the deeply flawed process that took place over the last 7 months. As counsel to President Trump, we have remained mostly quiet but have consistently noted the problems with this grand jury proceeding, ranging from questionable to downright unconstitutional. The lens now provided by this foreperson into the lack of seriousness and respect for this process that existed behind the grand jury walls is truly shocking to the legal conscience. What we have seen over the past 48 hours proves that whatever conclusions were drawn were not the result of an analytical, trustworthy, or credible investigation as one would expect in a matter of historic proportion such as this. That is a very acute observation from the lawyers that are representing Trump. I think they have exactly the right mindset, and I really hope that this completely dismantles their quest to get him indicted. I think that it actually might. You guys can let me know what you think. I am no legal expert. I've never claimed to be one. It's actually one of my weakest areas, unfortunately, even though I do find it fascinating. Andy loves to talk about how case law is completely divorced from the state and is something that can be set up by precedents and for preceding cases, etc. Dip is in on the distraction game as well. He's climbing all over the place, so I fully expect him to try to come sleep on my laptop. So you guys can look forward to that whenever he decides to make it over to the desk. But I'm really curious what happens with this case with a grand jury after that grand jury foreperson did her little media tour. She was so desperate, and the media more than anything are to blame for this, because this person's a little bit unhinged. She's a little bit strange. She has a strange sense of humor and laughter, very vindictive politically, but the media was so excited to have a chance to pull one over on Trump that they had to bring her on. And it's resulted in this. I am going to laugh so hard if this means that Trump's lawyers have a leg up to get the whole grand jury proceeding dismissed. I'm really curious what happens next, because Emily should not have been talking at all. And apparently she has been deleting a bunch of her personal accounts ever since this happened. Almost like she realized that she made a mistake. We'll see what happens with that. So with our poll, I asked, would you take a drug or a vaccine that against cancer? Some said yes, 9%, 32% said no, just outright, and 59% said who made it? And that is a good response. That would be my first question too. It's very important to know where this comes from and how it's tested. Dad says she is a legit witch, evidently, into Wiccan and paganism and such. So I personally don't believe that witches are real. I'm not convinced that they ever were, except that in the Bible, they were told to suffer not. Witches, like, they were not allowed to practice however they wanted to in the kingdoms. And I think that we give them a lot more weight than they should have. Somebody who collects rocks and yells at the moon and smokes herbs and stuff is not really a witch. She just is trying to be edgy and thinks it's cool to say that she's fill in the blank, a pagan, a Wiccan, whatever. I guarantee you she has no idea what it actually means. She just thinks it's fun to make Pinterest boards about it. Many such cases, unfortunately. It's par for the course when it comes to trying to feel special, and young women trying to feel like they are really unique and really edgy and powerful. I remember when Trump was in office, there was a whole host of women who were like casting spells on him or something, and guess what it did? Nothing, because witchcraft really isn't real and it's completely ineffective. But Secretary Pete, just a question about protocol, sir. What agency was required to respond to the situation, sir? We should learn from this example, and you're just the man to teach us. That's a great question, Keenan. You should be a journalist. I appreciate it. The biblical witch of Endor was always an interesting topic to me, says Bree. Yes, I don't know enough about that one. My family stayed pretty much fully away from all of that stuff. Like my parents were not interested in even entertaining the topic at all. I found it rather interesting. I ended up reading Harry Potter because I didn't see the connection between what Harry Potter was talking about and what the Bible warned against. Now, whether I was wrong, who knows? But I still don't think that witches are really real, and they certainly don't have any power. All right, let's look next at this one because I found this one also hilarious. Black Panther communist Angela Davis, who teaches that the U.S. was built by racist colonizers, faces calls to pay reparations after genealogy show reveals her white Puritan ancestors arrived in America on the Mayflower. Angela Davis, 79, by the way, I believe she's actually a convicted criminal terrorist because of her work with the Black Panthers, learned that her ancestor came to the U.S. on the Mayflower. A famed Black Panther, who's also a communist, has faced calls to pay reparations after discovering her ancestors were white Puritans who arrived in the U.S. on the Mayflower. Now, the response to this on Twitter by all the people who love Angela Davis and think she's right about race were that she was the result of forcible activities. You know exactly what I'm talking about. I don't want to use this word on YouTube for risk of being demonetized. They are not correct, though. Everybody on the Mayflower was white. This wasn't a case of slaves being taken advantage of by owners. Angela Davis, 79, was flabbergasted to discover both sides of her family were white and that her mom's ancestors were slave owners on the PBS show Finding Your Roots. I love this more than words can say. And the stunning revelations sparked calls for the famously woke Marxist University of California professor, of course she's a professor, she's a communist and she's a terrorist, to herself pay reparations, having previously called on whites to pony up in the past. Well, isn't that an interesting turn of events? Sharing a tweet about the show, conservative pundit Matt Walsh wrote, "It gets better. She's also descended from slave owners. On her father's side is a pilgrim, on her mother's side is a slave owner. Looks like Angela Davis owes some reparations." Another Twitter user called AK Kamara wrote, "Angela Davis, a radical Marxist and former Black Panther, recently discovered she is also the ancestor of colonizers and slave owners. I guess she owes herself reparations. This timeline is hilarious." I'm inclined to agree. I thought this story was really interesting. Yeah, so if you go, all right, yeah. Angela Davis's ancestors arrived in America on the Mayflower. That is not an actual tweet. It's just an image. I was going to look at some of the comments under Chris Rufo's commentary there, but we can't do that. Darn you, Daily Mail, for using a screenshot instead of an actual tweet. Here she is, looking sheepish. Oh my gosh, my eye is itching. Forgive me. Marxist professor Angela Davis, who teaches that America was built by racist colonizers, finds out her ancestor was on the Mayflower. She's also descended from a slave owner. Here's the thing, too. No one is responsible for their past, but I think it's incredibly rich that this person who tries to punish everyone else for the sins of their fathers is now learning that both sides of her family were not exactly who she thought they were, and exactly the people that she blames for colonizing the U.S. Fascinating. Davis became nationally known in 1970 when guns she owned were used in the holding up of a Marin County courtroom in California, which left 4 dead, including the judge. That is terrorist activity. After the FBI issued a warrant for her arrest, she went on the run and became listed as one of the department's 10 most wanted. High praise for a woman, I suppose. After her eventual arrest, she spent 15 months in jail before being found not guilty. Davis was born in Birmingham, Alabama in 1944 during an era of segregation and violent racial division in the South. While studying in West Germany in her youth, she was drawn to far-left politics and upon returning to the U.S. became involved with the Black Panthers and the Communist Party USA. She appeared shocked during the TV interview that aired this week, in which Finding Your Roots host Henry Louis Gates Jr. told her of her ancestry. "No, I can't believe this. My ancestors did not come here on the Mayflower," she said, only to be later told that they did indeed arrive in the U.S. aboard the famed pilgrim ship. The Mayflower was an English boat that brought white English families known as the Pilgrims to the American continent to permanently establish the New England colony in 1620. You are descended from the 101 people who sailed on the Mayflower, reiterated Gates Jr., who is the director of the Hutchins Center for African American Research at Harvard University. The 1-hour show, in which public figures learn about their ancestry, outlined how William Brewster, who traveled aboard the boat with his wife, Mary Wentworth Brewster, was Davis's 10th great-grandfather. Mary was one of only 5 adult women from the Mayflower to have survived the first winter after arriving in the U.S., and one of the only 4 such to survive until the first Thanksgiving in 1621, which she was said to have helped cook. Wow, that's actually a really neat family history, and if she weren't a ridiculous leftist ideologue, she would understand that. The revelation caused many to point out the complexity of ancestry, and on social media, some suggested that by the same logic, Davis should pay Black reparations. The concept of reparations, an idea she has endorsed in the past, is that people with ancestors who were enslaved should be financially reimbursed by those whose ancestors enslaved them. Yeah, that would be her. This vividly illustrates the absurdity of reparations as a concept, among other things, said one person on Twitter in response to a clip of Revelation. Absolutely. Before any talk about reparations, everybody needs to take the ancestry DNA test. I think a lot of people would be shocked to discover who they were descended from, said another. That's possible, but at the same time, you're not responsible for that. It's not your fault who you're descended from. You had no say in that. You had no say in when you were born or to whom you were born or what color your skin is. None of that is within your control, and that's part of the reason that I don't judge anyone for any of that, and that's part of the reason I hate the idea of reparations. Nobody chose to be born a descendant of a slave owner. Period. Absolutely no one would. We know slavery is terribly bad at this point, and I don't think that anyone would choose to have that linked to them. Period. An engraving of the Mayflower, the English boat that brought white Puritans to the New World in 1620. That is fascinating. That's beautiful. Yeah, it's a really cool piece of history. If only she had enough character to recognize that. Davis also made discoveries about her mother, Sally Bell, who was found to be the daughter of a successful white Alabama lawyer who himself was descended from a slave owner. Belle was a school teacher and grew up in a foster home, never knowing either of her biological parents. Her mother had genetics that traced back to Africa, but her father was John Aston Darden, who was also involved in politics and was born in Rockford, Cosa, Alabama in 1879. He has my mother's lips, Davis said when she was presented with a photo of her grandfather. I can't get used to the fact that this is my mother's father. Yep, turns out that maybe you shouldn't judge people by their ancestors. A clipping from an old Alabama newspaper shone light on who Darden had been. The former publisher of the Goodwater Enterprise, who served as both a representative and a senator at various times in 1914 to 1933, had practiced law here 40 years. Was he a member of the Ku Klux Klan or of the White Citizens Council? Davis asked. That's something I would also want to know, because in those days, in order to achieve that power, one had to thoroughly embrace white supremacy. Okay, that's her argument. We don't know if it's true. I'm both glad and I'm angry. I'm really, really angry, she added. Okay, what is being angry going to do about it? Absolutely nothing. Total nonsense. This is her mother on the right. She's a school teacher in Birmingham. This is really interesting. As Gates went back further in time, things got murkier still. Stephen Darden, her 4th great-grandfather, was born in colonial Virginia around 1750. He was a patriot who played the drums during the Revolutionary War, according to a muster roll. Afterward, he moved from Virginia to Georgia, where he owned a farm and at least 6 slaves. So not only was he an American patriot who helped separate the U.S. from Britain, he also was a slave owner because it was actually a socially acceptable institution at the time. Very, very interesting history. I actually think it's really cool that she has such deep roots in the U.S. My family came over to the U.S., I think before the potato famine, but certainly long after the time of, actually, you know what? I don't know. Let me see when the potato famine was. At least those particular ones. Yes, the Great Famine in Ireland was during the 1840s. Terrible, terribly tragic, but yeah, I'm not sure exactly when we came over, but it was before the potato famine. Was it? No, it was before the Troubles. You guys know what I'm talking about in Ireland, but it was after the potato famine. So it was after the 1840s, probably certainly long after slavery was abolished. So I don't think that I'm at risk of having any slave owners in my personal history, But again, I really don't know. And also, it's nobody's fault who they're related to. Not even Angela Davis, much as I dislike her. I always imagined my ancestors as the people who were enslaved. My mind and my heart are swirling with all of these contradictory emotions, she said. Yeah, of course you thought you were a victim because that plays right into your politics. We know, and it's boring. Maybe you should try to have a better, more nuanced ideology. Just saying. I'm glad on the one hand we've begun to solve this mystery. We have something we didn't have before, but at the same time I think it makes me even more committed to struggling for a better world. Sure, fine. You don't do that by talking about communism though. As they say, you're never going to make it with anyone anyhow if you go around carrying pictures of Chairman Mao. This world could give rise to such a beautiful person as my mother was not the world I want to see in the future, she added. Davis's father, Benjamin Frank Davis, grew up in Linden, Alabama. His mother was Molly Spencer, but similarly, nothing was known about his father. Alabama census records indicate that for at least 10 years, Molly lived next door to a white man named Murphy Jones. Records state that he sold her 2 acres of land for $200 and that the two were very likely relatively close. Using genetic profiles of Murphy's known living relatives, researchers found multiple matches to Angela, indicating that Jones was her grandfather. That is so interesting. They really go in depth. It's actually a super cool show. And honestly, I think it's great just for this kind of bombshell alone. I think it's amazing that people can be humbled so rapidly when they stake so much of their lives on identity politics. And I just have to say, don't do that. Ever. It's never a good policy. Whether you get called on the carpet on a show like this or not, it's not a good policy. It's not a good way to live your life. Andy says, you're thinking of the other Germany, love. West Germany was the Allies. Well, when she came back, she was a communist, so I don't think it was a positive thing in either case. I don't particularly care who people are descended from, says Dad says stuff, neither do I. And you don't deserve to feel guilty for something that you had no control over or for something that one of your relatives did. We are taught in school that reparations was the main cause of Mustache Man in World War II. I'm not sure about that. That I haven't heard. Very interesting. Bree says also paying reparations on something that was legally acceptable at the time makes no sense. If it was reparations for continuing slavery after it was abolished, then that would be different. I'm inclined to agree. And he says if you have a drop of black African blood, you're treated as 100% black unless you're not politically expedient to claim exactly. And they'll actually literally say you are not politically black because being black apparently means that you have to be left-leaning. It's absolutely nonsense to me, but that's what they try to sell. Dad says stuff, says, yeah, I'm pretty sure racially based taxes would be extremely damaging to our social fabric. Of course. Why do you think communists want it? That's exactly what they want. Okay, this woman actually has really cool ancestry. She should be proud. Exactly what I said. 100%. If your family came over on the Mayflower, that's really cool. Only 101 people came over on it, and many of them died, especially during that first winter because it's a New England winter and it's not nice. Like, it's super cold today. I would not have done well trying to live outside. Dad says stuff, says, you're Irish? That's correct. I am indeed, but not related to terrorists, I don't think. You may have been a slave descendant, though, Lydia. The Irish were enslaved as well for a long part of history. That's correct, but we also, I don't think, lived in New York City where much of that was prevalent or very much on the East Coast at all. Not sure, though. Really interested in learning that kind of stuff about my family, but at the same time, even if my grandparents were my great-great-grandparents or wherever, however many generations back were enslaved, I'm not angry with whoever did it because that was a social institution for whatever reason. That's what they thought was okay to do. And I know for a fact that it was partly because the U.S. was a Protestant country and the Irish were Catholic and they had a lot of kids. And the Protestants were actually genuinely concerned that Irish people would outbreed them and outnumber them, which was nonsense just as much then as it is now. CJ Veal says, which makes most of the citizens in the South legally black to all that applies. Welcome, fam. Thank you very much. Do biracial people get half the amount? Asked Cliff the alien. I have no idea how this is supposed to work. I really don't. It doesn't make any logical sense and it gets very confusing very fast. And I'm very glad that I don't have to defend it at all. I just think it's complete nonsense and anybody who defends it is full of nonsense too. All right, Bree has a facial structure similar to Irish. It's possible, certainly so. Andy says, I think that's a point more people should hear. Frustrations with collective punishment of Germany were absolutely a major factor priming Germany for the authoritarian collectivism. Interesting point. And he says, then we are all, in fact, Africans. I have heard that theory. I've also heard compelling cases for the idea that we came out of somewhere in, I think, Eastern Europe, but we still don't really know. Zach says, but we suffer from generational damage. We need reparations. Our people suffer from the stigma and cultural bias. I don't think that there is enough generational damage unless you talk about something that directly affected your family, like segregation or redlining or blockbusting. So those were actual things that would have had an actual influence on how your family was able to save money and kind of pass that on. And I do understand the concept of generational wealth being problematized by the history of racism that we have in this country. But we also need to understand some of the historical and cultural context around how racism was viewed. For example, my family, Irish, was probably heavily discriminated against at some point in the past. It's okay. They suffered through that, and I'm sure it was incredibly difficult and did not make their lives any better, but it was just one of many things they were up against at the time. They didn't even have anesthetic at the time, so I'm pretty sure that they were not super worried about people being mean to them with words, as long as they weren't actually being violent against them. And honestly, I want everyone who thinks that reparations might possibly be a good idea to listen to a full season of Dan Carlin's Hardcore History, because the way people acted in the past is so insane. In fact, I don't know if you guys know this about our former boss, Tim Pool, but he's a tiny bit Japanese, because it wasn't because of a love story, that's for darn sure. The Japanese were an incredibly rapacious people, period. And that's just the way history works. Everybody's groups had something like that. Especially Japanese people were brutal. They were actually incredibly fierce warriors, which you really wouldn't know by looking at them today. Many such cases. Swedish women even today are still very beautiful because the Swedish were Vikings that would go to other countries and steal their women. History isn't nice. We're only nice today. And in fact, I constantly feel like we live in this world of insulated with cotton candy. Like, we're not even hearing regular noises right because we're so surrounded by soft, squishy stuff. And we can't get over the fact that history was bad. And everybody was bad, and everybody was constantly fighting everyone else, and there was no peace for any length of time, and there was hardly any time to actually develop something like philosophy like they did in Rome and Greece. Part of the reason they were able to pause and think about the world was because they had slave labor to make it so that they themselves didn't have to be constantly working. The world is not a nice place. It's just not. And we don't even understand that anymore because we're really not taught history correctly or thoroughly. The world is a very harsh place. If I recall correctly, Thomas Hobbes called life nasty, brutish, and short in the past. That certainly was the case. We honestly have nothing to complain about today on the physical front. We have, sure, a lot of issues with just living life as a human being is just generally kind of challenging, but we don't have neighbors who are trying to pillage us. We don't have people trying to conquer us. We are not serfs working for a landlord. There are a whole host of things that we're not and that we don't have to worry about anymore, but we take so much for granted that we choose to split hairs over stuff like slavery, which was a worldwide institution that the United States ended. Now, if I understand correctly, Britain ended it a few years before we did, even though slavery wasn't actually in the UK, it was in British colonies, and they ended it, I don't know why I can't remember the name of the man who was behind all of that, but it was one person who pushed for all of this stuff so powerfully that he made it all happen. I want to say, oh gosh, no, I'm sorry, I just can't remember his name. Maybe you guys can remind me, but it was an institution that was everywhere in the world. Africans sold Africans to other Africans. Africans sold Africans to Americans. Slavs sold Slavs to other people. Irish people sold Irish people to other places. British people sold the Irish. Scottish people sold other Scottish people. People have been selling people since selling things was possible to do. Since we figured out that currency was a thing, we were like, hey, here's a creature that can get a lot of work done. I don't really care about what they want to do with their lives. Their life isn't really special to me. It's not unique. I'm the only one that really matters in this picture, and I'm going to sell this creature to these other people to see if I can make a little money. That's how it worked. Unfortunately, I personally am incredibly glad that the US took a front seat approach to ending that institution. I could not be happier that they did that. And I really feel like splitting hairs about how it was ended and or where it was ended first and who decided to try to own slaves is just silly. I think that's just splitting hairs to such an insane degree. When you look at the gigantic picture of history as a whole, and then you look at the slice that was American slavery, you have to just say, hey, you know what? They saw that something was wrong here, and good for them. They put a stop to it. I'm just very happy to see that. I could not be happier to be related to people who made that happen. And he says, I don't even really know how one would take offense at what you said. I was just pontificating about the evils of collectivism. That's correct. And he does pontificate a lot about the evils of collectivism. Eric, good to see you again with the $17.76. Thank you very much, sir. Did you watch? And if so, what did you think? I am sorry. I immediately forgot. I'm going to write a note right now so that I remember to watch it after. It's called Wait in the Truck. I remember that. Watch. Wait in the Truck. All right. Now, hopefully I will remember, but I am very forgetful. So we'll see. Leftists have been squawking about it for a few weeks, histrionically claiming it glorifies murder/vigilantism. Japanese are consents a bit grayer there. Yes. So the left especially knows nothing of history. And even people on the right aren't fully in touch with how bad people can be. I don't think that you can understand how good people are capable of being until you understand how bad we can be too. I think it was Nietzsche who said that the line between good and evil runs through every human heart. CJ Veal says, we have very little to complain about. I agree. Cultural ignorance and the weaponization of the worst in modern day societies pushes us further away from social reconciliation. Yes. And even so, we are still much closer to coherent social understandings than we ever have been in the past. And I'm optimistic that one day we will get there. Oh, I shrunk the wrong window. Hold on. Let me shrink this down a little bit more. Okay. I have a bunch of articles that I wanted to get to. They're all in the description if you're curious. I just wanted, you know what? This is the most important one that I think I want to leave you guys with tonight, because we were talking about the Canadian detransitioner, Michelle. Canadian detransitioner says she feels nauseous because others like her still continue to push pro-transgender message while ostracizing her for saying she regrets getting, a complete mastectomy and a hysterectomy. And here's something interesting that you can tell people who call you a transphobe, because certainly they will if you take any kind of strong stance on this. Trans patients who take hormone drugs are up to 7 times more likely to suffer a stroke or heart attack, as researchers say medically transitioning is not a risk-free endeavor. That's correct. When people call you a transphobe, you may correct them and tell them that you actually do care about these people and you don't want their bodies to be irreversibly harmed inside and out. Hormone therapies have previously been linked to potentially deadly clotting, now commonly used to treat gender dysphoria as a growing number transition. So, when I was in anatomy and physiology, and you might blame this on the fact that I was relatively entry level at this time, but my impression of hormones was that we don't have any idea of everything they do. In fact, as I've gone away from being a student of that field, the more I've been like, yeah, no, we really don't know how medicine works at all. Like, consistently we discover side effects that we really like, or shocking side effects that we had no idea would happen when we administer X chemical to try to treat something. We don't know how everything works. We certainly don't even know how the human body works in entirety. And this alone should be enough to warn people off the danger of taking something like cross-sex hormones. We don't know how even the hormones that we are supposed to have in our own bodies affect our bodies. We just don't. It's actually kind of interesting to watch how scientists are continually coming up with, scientists now discover that estrogen causes this or testosterone causes this. And it's just like, we don't know. There's so much that we don't know. And the concept of giving people cross-sex hormones has always kind of blown my mind because, well, I won't say that these people don't understand how hormones work. They clearly do. They found a way to use hormones to make them money. So that's their motivation. But it's wrong. It's morally and ethically unprincipled to push this kind of thing when you know for a fact that we don't know well enough how exactly these chemicals affect our own bodies in the bodies that they're supposed to be in, let alone when you inject a man with a bunch of estrogen, or when you inject a woman with a bunch of testosterone. We just have no way of knowing. And in fact, we haven't been doing this for long enough to have some seriously long-term studies. It's a serious issue. Here we have a Massachusetts-based detransitioner who goes by the name Shapeshifter, transitioned from male to female but encountered appalling medical issues. He has since detransitioned, identifying as a gay man with a feminine look. This happens to a lot of these kids. They're finding that many of these kids who think they're trans, when they're given enough mental health assistance and enough time, come to realize that they're not trans, they're homosexual. That's fine. That's completely different, though, and not something you should chop up your body over. And I'm sure I'm going to be excoriated for that stance for sure. But I just want people who think that transition is the compassionate thing to do to know that it's actually a serious problem for the people who transition. Eric, thank you again for your super chat. Been studying and speaking Japanese for almost 20 years now, nowhere near as bad as it was under EOJ, working toward the GEA CPS, but people talking about toxic patriarchy are curiously silent about Japan and China, etc. Yes. That's because they're afraid to talk about these cultures because they're different than ours. They function along entirely different lines. And if I recall correctly, these are considered honor cultures, where the most important thing, this is why Japanese have things like seppuku. For someone who is dishonored, they would take the Canadian way out because there was just nothing left to live for. And you find a lot of that in the Middle East as well. You find it in China. It's just a completely different way of thinking than we have in the West. I forget what kind of society our culture is. It's certainly not honor, though. I just don't remember the different classifications. But yes, absolutely. There is a reason nobody talks about those other cultures. Not only is it possible for Americans to get by without learning anything about any other culture, which is kind of gross and lazy too, we don't know anything about history, our own history, let alone anyone else's history. But to be fair, we are also a relatively young country, so there's none of the, caveman nonsense. There's none of the out of Africa stuff that we were looking at. Andy says it is important to note that slavery in the U.S. was in fact much more cruel and dehumanizing than most cultures with slavery throughout history. Well, I don't know about that. I would be interested to see your references, my good sir. You'll have to show me that after the show. Zach says, I heard Bruce Jenner regrets not having a unit anymore. Who knows? I feel like a lot of these people who make these drastic changes are certainly going to regret it. It's a serious, serious step. And I don't think that it's something that should be taken lightly at all. And certainly not encouraged to someone who is not mentally stable. Sarenko says, wait. So you're telling me putting random hormones in our bodies that we don't truly understand causes undesirable side effects? Insert minion what meme. Yeah, exactly. We don't understand it. And then we're shocked when it comes up with a whole bunch of negative side effects. Any good medical practitioner could have told you that, but for some reason, no one did. Something is wrong with the institution of medicine in the U.S. In fact, one of the articles I was going to look at was the top black doctor slams woke implicit bias training that's overwhelmed the medical field and says her black colleagues and patients should not be told that all white medics are inherently racist. She is, of course, very much so correct. Drug development relies a lot on happy accidents and capitalizing on those accidents 100%. Someone go like this video. It's bothering me. She only has 49 likes. Let's get to 50. That's right. Make sure you like the video, share, and subscribe for sure. Very important. Sarenko says, side effects just means effects that are not intended effect of taking the drug. Exactly. So if, for example, you wanted all your hair to fall out, then you should do chemotherapy. That's not what it's intended for, but it is one of the effects that it has. It's just not what it's intended to do. What is a woman was a great step in forwarding the conversation about transitioning. I completely agree. Matt Walsh has really played a huge role in all of this stuff. Good for him. Leftists like to take things to absurd extremes and effectively claim there was no such thing as chattel slavery of that kind before the evil white race brought African slaves to the New World, says Andy. Eric says, I love that. The Canadian way. Oh my God. Yeah. Well, I don't really want to say the S word because we try to cater to YouTube's delicate sensibilities. They literally ask you to check a box that says, we are not going to say anything that might possibly offend anyone or upset anyone. So we try not to do any of that stuff. It's good stuff. Good times, for sure. But let's see. 100% Andy, Canadian out has to become a thing. Yeah, I keep pushing it. Stevie says the caste system is very strong in India. It's quite brutal. 100%. Yeah, still a lot of brutality out there in the world. You can look no further than the country that Joe Biden abandoned with the Taliban, forcing these women to, okay, so they can't go to doctors that are men, but also women can't get education, so there aren't any women doctors. So I guess that just means that women don't go to the doctor. Except, wait a minute, you need your Taliban babies, so women are going to die in childbirth at insane rates. So it'll be fun for sure. Maybe they doth protest too much because when they put into practice, their political ideology inevitably leads to an entire nation of state-owned slaves. That's a good point. Indeed. Whatever you do, do not like the video if you love collectivism. Bree says, wait, how is your super chat 2345? I'm so confused. What currency are you using? You can select it to be however you want it, however much you want it to be. He sent a super chat that was 1776, which is awesome. Those are the greatest ones. I just asked my husband if he could tell and accidentally said I couldn't tell what human money this is. You are an alien, believe it. Keenan says, Lydia, get some rest. You sound exceedingly fatigued. At least you're taking your medication. That is correct. I am fine. I'm just running out of my voice today because we recorded an episode of Making the Argument with the Freitas clan over there. So my voice is just a little more fractured than it usually is, unfortunately. In fact, I gotta get that up now. So I am going to let you guys go now. It is now 7:02 p.m. Thank you all for joining me. Thank you very much for your super chats. I am excited to see you guys tomorrow. Tomorrow is Friday. It's going to be awesome. We're going to chill. We are going to celebrate the weekend. We're going to do a quick little recap, and I'm going to read you guys all these articles that I meant to read you today. I pulled up way too many, so we'll look at all that tomorrow. Maybe Andy will be able to join us. Maybe not. We'll see what happens. All right. Until next time. Bye, guys. How's it going?